Hi everyone. In this video I'm going to show you how to set up a menu scene in Unity. First of all, we'll set up the scene itself and then we'll dive into the code. I have a project here where I have a few icons loaded, so an audio off and on, an exit sign, a handler for the slider, and a play button. First of all of these I want to use in some regard in one of the buttons or the slider for that matter that I'm gonna add to the menu scene. This means that any graphic that you add, especially if it's like a PNG that needs transparency, you need to go in and define the texture type as a sprite 2D and UI to make sure that it is compatible with the canvas and the UI in Unity. So hit apply. And make sure that you set all of these up. You can select multiples at the same time and change the same setting. I've also added a tiny piece of music here so that you can see how audio settings can change inside of Unity with a menu scene. So in your hierarchy here, let's start by right-clicking. Let's go to UI, and inside of UI you have a lot of different things to choose from. So basically what I'm going to show you today is a button. So just how to get a start play button, for instance. I'm going to show you a slider and a toggle button. Most of these will have mostly the same functionality, so you'll be able to figure out how this functionality can be accessed. But let's start with a simple button. As soon as I create this button, I should also get a canvas. And of course, the button should be laid on that canvas. And if we look at Unity here, you can see that I'm getting this very large square and then the button right in the center. And down here in my game view, I can see my button visible right here. So this button here is TextMesh Pro based, meaning that the text itself inside of the button is a TextMesh Pro element. So in here I would be able to change the text to anything like play, and then I would have a play button, and you can see the text update out here. The button itself has functionality right here and has an on-click event that we'll be tying some functionality into a bit later. But first of all, let's set up this button here with a play button sprite, the icons that I've set up right here. So I'm just going to take my play image and drag that into the UI sprite. And as you can see now, my text is overlaid. So my TextMesh Pro text is overlaid my button text itself. So in this case, I'm actually going to select my TextMesh Pro element here and just delete it because I don't really need it for this case here. I'm also going to just scale the button so that it fits. I could also just input the values over here in the rect transform, but well, this looks fine. So let's select a canvas and make sure that the canvas will also always follow the size of the screen that we're currently working on. So if I look at the canvas settings over here, they are in screen space overlay for display 1, which is fine. Right now the UI scaling mode though is set to constant pixel size. I would like this to be scale with the screen size. And I'm going to set my reference screen as a full HD game. So 1920 by 1080 pixels. This means that down here where it's currently set as an 16:9 aspect ratio with a 1x scaling, you can see here that no matter like how I scale it, it always stays the same. So that same thing would happen if I were to go into and play this as a real game. I would also be able to see the button like scale to the screen size that I have, even if it's like a 4K screen or anything like that. As soon as you have other aspects, you might need to dive into how the canvas can then structure itself based on a more responsive kind of design for those screens, like ultra wides and such. So before we get into any code, let's just set up all the buttons and all the functionality. So now I'm going to right click my canvas here, UI again. I want another button. I'm just going to move this button down a bit and over. And in this case, this button is my exit. I should probably also name these buttons now. So this is my play button and this is my exit button. So the exit button also has a exit sprite that I can add to it, meaning that I also need to delete my TextMesh Pro here. Again, I could go into the rect transform, but I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to scale this a bit. I'm not going for perfect. I'm just going for functionality in this case. Let's add another element to this. So UI, and let's add a toggle. So the toggle in this case isn't TextMesh Pro based, meaning that as you can see here, the text looks really like jagged and almost like pixelated. So this is essentially the old input system, whereas you would probably go into the toggle here and change the label to a TextMesh Pro thing. I'm not going to really use the label for anything. I'm just going to show you how background and toggle kind of work together. So the way that I have set up my audio is that I have an audio off sign and a audio on sign. But if you look at the toggle, I essentially have background and check mark. But because I'm kind of doing the inverted thing, so my audio here is with the check mark, and then I'm saying audio off. I have just added this like a line across it. So in this case, I would go to background and say that that is my audio off, meaning I would change that UI sprite to like with the label all over it. And then the check mark itself needs to be the audio on sign, like so. So as you can see here, if I go to the toggle, and you can see if I turn it on and off, so is on essentially just shows me that audio thing, and is off, well, then it gets that line across. Also, just for the visibility of it, I'm going to scale it up a bit, and I'm going to move it down below these buttons here. So the final element that we need here is the slider. So I'm going to right click my canvas again. I'm going to go to UI, and I'm going to add a slider. This slider element also is quite simple. It has a handle, it has a fill color, and it has a background. So if I unfold it here, you can see the background, you can see the fill area, and of course the handle itself. And if I select the slider itself, I also have a value that I can change here. So you can see like how that works. Let's change the contents of this. So I'm going to go to background here. I'm going to take my slider and I'm going to add it to the background color. So this is that gold kind of effect that you see here. So I'm not really going to bother much with fill area. I'm going to go to the slider handle and change the handle out for this handle right here. So right now, if I were to change the slider, you can see that my values changed, but I see this fill area. I could add my own fill area, but for now I'm just going to select this and turn it off. So I'm just going to have this one singular handle that I can move back and forth. I could also scale it down a bit so it's not as humongous as it currently seems. This is all the button functionality that I want to set up. So now I need a game object that can hold my controller and maybe some other functionalities as well. So I'm going to click outside the canvas. I'm going to right click and create a 3D object, a cube. I'm going to call this cube my menu control cube. This is essentially just a development cube. I'm going to move it very far below the scene itself. So it's just hovering down here. So first of all, I want the music to be on this cube as well. So I'm just going to take the music track and drag it over to the cube here and set the music to be play on awake, meaning that it should just start right away. I'm also going to make sure that the spatial blend here is set to 2D, meaning that it's going to be the same audio for anywhere in this current scene. I'm going to minimize this just for the visibility of it. So next up is the controller itself. So I'm going to click add component, and now I'll add a script. I'm going to say main menu controller and add the script. So as soon as this script is added, let's jump into these different types of functionality that we need. So first of all, we want to make sure that we can open a new scene, meaning we can click the play button that goes straight to the first scene that we want to play. So here we need the Unity Engine scene management. So using Unity Engine.scene management. We also want to be able to read some functionalities from the UI itself. So let's set up another using the Unity Engine.UI. We'll load in the slider value, the volume slider that we set up. So we'll say public slider, and then just call it volume slider. We also want to make sure that we have a float value that has our saved volume. We'll make that private, and it's a float value, and it's going to be float, and we'll call it the saved volume. So we'll need something in the start function in just a minute. We don't need the update function for this, but we'll start by adding the button functionality that we have set up. So that means the start game and the exit game functionality. So set up a public void method. We'll call it start game. So in here, we'll call the scene manager with a load scene method. And then inside here, we'll just parse in a string where we'll load our scene called main, which is my first level in the game. So we'll now make a public void method again. We'll call it exit game. And then in the method itself, we'll just say application.quit, meaning it's going to exit and essentially just quit the game that we currently have running. The next function that we want to set up is the one that controls the volume based on what the slider value has been set to. So we'll make another public void. We'll say set volume. And in here, we'll find the audio listener. So there should always be only one audio listener in the scene. We'll say .volume. And we'll set this equal to our volume slider.value. So this means that now we have set the volume, but to make sure that we can also essentially keep our volume in the different scenes that we would be loading. Let's say we want to set the volume to begin with as at like 50%, and we want second and third level to also have the same audio level at 50% or whatever. we'll make sure that we parse this same value, so the volume itself, into our player preferences. So we'll say player prefs dot set a float value. We need to tag it or call it something, so we'll say volume, and it's going to be the volume slider dot value. So this also means that this needs to be loaded in every single scene at a specific point, meaning in the start. So for any like preloader or any other game object that controls the volume, you need to have a specific line of code in your start function for just any game object, and then it's going to set the volume based on what the player preferences has been set to. So next up is we'll set up our toggle volume button. So further down the list here, we'll set up a public void again. We'll call it toggle mute. So inside of toggle mute, we want to set up an if statement to figure out if the audio listener is set to 0 or above 0 or not, so that it can also, like, if we click the volume back, it doesn't auto jump to 100%, but we want to keep the already existing volume setting that we currently had. So we'll say if our audio listener dot volume is larger than 0, then set our saved volume equal to the audio listener's volume, and then we'll set our audio listener volume equal to 0. And also, just for the sake of updating our slider, we want to set our volume slider value to not the save volume, but 0 in this case. So next up, let's set up an else. So else, we want to set up our audio listener dot volume equal to our saved volume, and then of course also our volume slider dot value. And just to make sure that everything gets back to normal, we'll say player prefs, and just to make sure that our volume also gets updated to be off in our player preferences, we'll say player prefs dot set float, and we'll say audio listener dot volume. So this is our toggle switch. So now we have our start button, we have our exit button, we have our volume slider, we have our toggle for the mute. Now we just need our start to be updated so that if this scene ever needs to be loaded again, it remembers what the settings have been set to. So we'll say if the player preferences dot has the key that is called volume, then set the saved volume equal to the player prefs dot get the float value from volume. We'll set our audio listener dot volume to be equal to our saved volume, and of course also the volume slider to be equal to our saved volume as well. Then in the else, we'll set up the same as before. So audio listener dot volume equal to saved volume, and the volume slider value equal to our saved volume as well. So this should essentially be the entire script that we need. I'm going to save it and then jump back into Unity. So here back in Unity, we need to pipe in all of these functionalities. So first of all, the slider needs to go into our main menu controller's volume slider slot right here. So it needs that specific functionality. So we'll drag it right into this one so that it knows where the slider is. Then we can go into the individual buttons. So the play button has a on click event. So we'll say plus, and we can take our menu controller cube and grab that and throw it right into the functionality here. Instead of no function, we'll go to main menu controller, and we should have access to any public member of this class. So there should be a start game. So this is now the start game button. Same goes for the exit. We'll take the menu control cube, throw it into the on click event. Instead of no function, main menu controller function, and then exit game. So this is now our exit button. Then the toggle also needs to have a on value change here. So we'll say plus, we'll add the control cube again. We'll go to main menu controller, and it's the toggle mute that we need to turn on here. And then of course the slider itself needs the slider functionality. So we'll again add this, add a control cube, go to function, main menu controller, and we'll find our set volume function that we set up here. So let's try to test this out. I'm gonna hit play for now. As you can hear, the music can go up and down, come back, or I could toggle it off, toggle it back on. If I am at 50% and I toggle it off, it jumps back to 50%. If I hit play, it jumps me straight into my main game that I have shown you already. And if I just jump out and hit play again here, again I have the same slider. So if I were to hit exit in this build game, it should exit out of the game itself. There is a way to get the Unity editor to exit as well with a editor kind of preset. So if in Unity editor, then it can also exit. But hey, you have the play button up here for that. So let's set up a quick script for every other scene that we might need to load where we want to have the player preferences volume loaded. So if I jump into main right in here, let's just for sake of this add a quick 3D object cube. On this cube, I'm just gonna add a volume set script. I'm just calling it volume set. So the way that this works is here inside of Visual Studio again, I'm gonna delete my update method. In the start method itself, I'm gonna say if the player preferences has a key that is called volume, then set the audio listener volume equal to the player pref get float for that specific volume. And this essentially start functionality, and this if statement is what you would need on any consecutive level that you build to make sure that it sets the volume as you have it in your main menu. A quick little note here to end off with: if you want any highlight options for the buttons, if you hover your mouse over them, you can go over here in this highlighted color and change it to anything that you might see fitting. So let's say a like yellowish one here, and then inside of the play for this, so when we play it back, you can see that it highlights with that given color. It's just if you need some other user feedback than just being a static image, you can do that. So this also concludes the menu system. This also concludes how to set up a menu in Unity. Thank you for watching, everyone.